On December 2nd, 1993, a phone rang in one of the hotels in the capital of Colombia. In that part of the world, it was perhaps the most important call of the decade. People had been waiting for it, at least the Colombian Army general, federal agents, and a few CIA consultants were. Also waiting was a frightened woman with 2 children, a son and a daughter. She picked up the phone. On the other end of the line was her husband, the head of the most fearsome and powerful criminal organization in South America in the 20th century, a man who single-handedly challenged the governments of both Colombia and the United States. He was the #1 target for anyone wearing a badge in that country. The call was immediately tapped. The main question, would the man stay on the line long enough for them to trace him? Today, we'll talk about the legendary drug lord, one of the main anti-heroes of the second half of the 20th century, Pablo Escobar and his Medellin cartel. The main character of this story, Pablo Escobar, was born on December 1st, 1949, into a modest farming family. Like any normal kid, Escobar dreamed of a bright future where he wouldn't have to dig up potatoes like his father. What exactly he wanted to become, we don't know for sure. Maybe a soccer player or a president. Colombian boys of that time dreamed of many things. But later, he would admit that as a child, he dreamed of earning 1,000,000 pesos and never knowing need. But in the Colombia of the 1950s, a boy from the Medellin suburbs had no chances for a future. The country was essentially under colonial dependence on the United States. All the big money in Colombia was controlled by American corporations, like the infamous United Fruit. In short, workers were paid pennies. If they were unhappy, they were sent to the army. Starting a political career wasn't a good idea either. You could be killed. Politics in Colombia had always been a dangerous game, tied to criminal and guerrilla groups. Young Escobar played soccer like all the other boys in the neighborhood. But he knew full well that no one would invite him to join the national team. However, for street kids, there were other, more grounded ways to achieve fame and money. Pablo began earning his first money the same way all the boys in the area did. For example, he looked after graves in the cemetery that no one tended to, stole the tombstones, and sold the stone to middlemen. Then he started selling counterfeit goods on the street, like cigarettes or fake lottery tickets, and of course, marijuana. We talk about these activities as if they were normal, and in 1960s Colombia, they were. The police were in on it. Escobar quickly became known as a sharp, daring, and even dangerous guy. But his parents were not happy. By the late 1960s, Escobar had gathered a team of similarly wild and bold young men and found a mentor, Alvaro Prieto. Prieto was a serious figure who smuggled large shipments of marijuana across the border and also kept an eye on things in the neighborhood, scouting for promising recruits. Escobar's gang started engaging in racketeering and controlled local shops. They also looked for expensive cars and blackmailed their owners. Those who didn't pay had their cars stolen and dismantled. Prieto had special workshops for this. There's a story that during minor raids, Pablo and his men used mopeds painted in 2 colors, red on one side and black on the other, to confuse the police. When witnesses went to the police, they couldn't describe the vehicle accurately. One person saw a red moped, while another saw a black one. In 1971, at just 22 years old, Pablo Escobar committed his first murder. On Alvaro Prieto's orders, Escobar's gang kidnapped a wealthy industrialist named Diego, a man whom the poor of Medellin saw as a ruthless rich man living in a big, beautiful house, paying his workers pennies. Escobar demanded that Diego call his family so they could bring the ransom and release him, but the old man stubbornly refused. Pablo tortured him and eventually killed him by strangling him. They dumped the body on the street. Prieto was unhappy, but Escobar promised to do better. However, after this murder, locals started to see him as a Robin Hood figure, which only strengthened his influence. It was around this time that Pablo began to be called El Doctor. It's unclear whether this was because he tortured his victims cold-bloodedly, like the infamous Dr. Mengele, or because of his knowledge of various types of weed. The crime rate in the country was so high that kidnappings became a daily routine. Official statistics from that time show that 10 people disappeared daily in Colombia. Gangs kidnapped people for ransom, while guerrilla and Marxist groups kidnapped for political reasons. Criminals even kidnapped each other. This led to the rise of express kidnappings, where the victim was chosen on the spot. After the ransom was paid, the person was usually released. Under Prieto's wing, Escobar made his career, participating in kidnappings and drug smuggling. Eventually, though, Pablo switched to a new payment system. Instead of receiving a fee for his work, he took a percentage of the gang's profits. By the age of 25, his fortune was measured in tens of millions of pesos. Stopping wasn't an option. Colombia became the second largest narco-state, behind only Cuba. But in the late 1950s, Cuba underwent a revolution, and the U.S. imposed a blockade on the island, cutting it off from the drug trade. This allowed Colombian figures like Alvaro Prieto to rise to power. Pablo decided to expand his business by dealing cocaine. In the 1970s, cocaine was a new and highly profitable drug on the market. He established connections and purchased raw materials in Ecuador. Bringing cocaine paste to Medellin, he processed it into powder and sold it. However, during one of his first deals, Escobar and his men were arrested by the police. However, something mystical happens. First, Escobar tries to bribe the judge, but the judge refuses. Then, 2 policemen who arrested Escobar are gunned down before the trial. As a result, Escobar and his accomplices are released. This is when his infamous principle plata o plomo, silver or lead, comes into play, meaning people had a choice between taking a bribe or facing death. Escobar would follow this principle for the rest of his life. His release strengthened his reputation and influence. The cocaine trade network Escobar organized operated for several years. However, he soon started thinking about expanding and attempting to monopolize the market. Escobar realized that to do this, he needed to unite all the major players and push out the weaker ones. He struck deals with other Medellin drug traffickers, including the Ochoa brothers, his cousin Gustavo Gaviria, and Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, known as El Mexicano. El Mexicano, like Escobar, was the son of poor farmers but took a different path. He became a hitman and gained notoriety working for a criminal group in the capital. He was nicknamed El Mexicano for his love of Mexican ranchera music and his swearing. Later, he bought one of Colombia's top soccer clubs, and even the team's anthem became Mexican. In 1976, Escobar and his new allies formed the Medellin cartel. At first, they took control of the entire region, and then they monopolized the cocaine supply from Colombia to the U.S. Those who wanted to do business had to negotiate with the cartel and pay 35% of their profits. In return, the cartel guaranteed security and delivery of the product. As the cartel gained strength, some small-time dealers avoided paying the fee, but over time, their numbers dwindled. The cartel left no room for competitors. The principle of plata o plomo applied to everyone. If you were in law enforcement or wanted to join the business, the cartel would either buy you off or kill you. Periodically, the Medellin cartels sent thousands to the cemetery, mostly gang members from rival groups, but also police officers and government officials. By the early 1980s, Escobar and his cartel controlled up to 80% of the cocaine supply to the U.S. They no longer relied on Ecuador for raw materials, as they now had their own plantations in Colombia. Escobar even bought Norman's Cay in the Bahamas, turning it into a hub for smuggling drugs into the U.S. It was a sort of pirate haven with machine gun turrets, radar systems, and armored boats. One of the key figures in this operation was Carlos Leder, nicknamed the German. He met George Young, an American student who was also involved in the drug trade. In prison, they discussed how to smuggle cocaine using small planes. Leder and Young reached out to Pablo Escobar and proposed the scheme, which turned into a highly profitable operation for the cartel. The cartel's operations through Norman's Cay were incredibly successful. Each small aircraft transported cocaine from Colombia, refueled on the island, and flew to Miami, evading radar. On average, up to 2 tons of cocaine passed through Norman's Cay each week. At the height of its power, the Medellin cartel was earning up to $60 million a day, unbelievable sums of money. The cartel structure resembled both a state and a corporation. The head of the cartel was like a president, with his deputies and department heads overseeing different areas: cultivation, processing, logistics, finance, and contract killings. Each department employed hundreds, if not thousands, of people, all highly organized and performing their assigned tasks. The cartel even created an espionage network, hiring professionals from various countries, including former British, Israeli, and Cuban military personnel. They trained the cartel's fighters, teaching them combat tactics. Within the cartel, cells were made up of family members or people from the same village, which helped maintain discipline and prevent leaks. If someone betrayed the cartel, their family was the first to pay the price. In addition to his drug trafficking, Escobar worked hard on his public image. He used his millions to build hospitals, schools, roads, and sports facilities in Medellin. This solidified his reputation as a defender of the poor. Escobar wanted people to see him not just as a drug lord, but as a benefactor who cared about his city. He even set up a department within the cartel to identify those in need, and the cartel's acts of charity were widely discussed, further enhancing his reputation. At the same time, Escobar used his immense wealth for his own luxury. He built the Hacienda Napoles estate, spanning 20 square kilometers. It had everything: a villa, a zoo with exotic animals, a racetrack, a brothel, and even its own airstrip. After Escobar's death, the hippos from his zoo spread out into the local swamps and started reproducing, creating a real problem for the local ecosystem since there are no natural predators for hippos in Colombia. Thus, Escobar impacted not only the economy but also the ecology of the country. Despite his criminal lifestyle, Pablo was a family man. In 1976, he married 15-year-old Maria Victoria Henao. She was only 12 when they met, and her parents opposed the marriage. However, Pablo eloped with her, with Maria's consent, and they soon married. Maria Victoria understood that her husband was involved in criminal activities but chose to accept it for the sake of their family. She gave birth to their first child in 1977. Despite having numerous mistresses, Escobar always placed great importance on family and his children. According to his son, Juan, Pablo once burned $2 million to keep his family warm while they were on the run from the police. Escobar also maintained strong ties with other family members. His brother, Roberto Gaviria, known as El Osito, Little Bear, was a co-founder of the Medellin cartel and managed its finances. After the cartel was dismantled, Roberto spent 10 years in prison and was once sent a letter bomb. He survived but lost an eye. After being released in 2016, Roberto tried to trademark his brother's image and filed a lawsuit against Netflix for creating the series Narcos. He also accused Elon Musk of stealing his idea for selling flamethrowers and launched a crowdfunding campaign to impeach Donald Trump. Roberto even created a cryptocurrency called Escobar Coin, but the project failed. Nevertheless, Roberto remains active, giving interviews and insisting that his brother never used cocaine. At some point, Medellin became too small for Escobar. He craved more power and ambition. He decided to expand his influence and made an attempt to enter politics, aiming to become a national hero or even the president. In 1982, Pablo ran for parliament and, after passing through all the necessary procedures, took a seat as a congressman. This position granted him parliamentary immunity and access to official ceremonies. For instance, he represented Colombia at the inauguration of Spain's prime minister. However, the Colombian authorities could not allow a drug lord to gain such power. Pablo faced opposition from presidential candidate Luis Carlos Golan and Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla. They launched a campaign to discredit Escobar, trying to show that he wasn't a patriot or philanthropist, but a criminal and murderer. Under the weight of accusations and political pressure, Escobar withdrew from politics in 1984. 3 months later, Rodrigo Lara was assassinated by 2 unknown men on a motorcycle who gunned down his car. This murder marked a turning point. The Colombian president declared war on the drug traffickers, and Escobar responded with terror. By the mid-1980s, the Medellin cartel held influence throughout the country. For every arrest, Escobar retaliated by killing police officers and officials, placing bounties on their heads. It was an all-out war, with newspapers filled with obituaries. In 1985, Escobar made a bold and ruthless move. He hired the left-wing guerrilla group M19 to storm the Supreme Court building and destroy documents that could lead to his extradition to the U.S. A brutal firefight ensued inside the courthouse, resulting in numerous deaths, and the documents were destroyed. The Supreme Court siege became one of the most notorious events in Colombian history. It drew even more attention from the U.S. to Escobar and his cartel's operations. The Reagan administration demanded that Colombian authorities capture cartel members and extradite them to the U.S. The Americans believed that only in their prisons would the drug traffickers face justice, as Colombian officials were often bribed. However, extradition was not a simple issue. The Colombian government wavered between signing an agreement and refusing it. Escobar and his associates exerted significant pressure on politicians through bribes and threats. Eventually, in 1987, the Colombian president vetoed the court's ruling that banned extradition, and the Americans succeeded in getting one of Escobar's allies, Carlos Leder, the German. Leder was sentenced to life plus 135 years in prison. However, in 2020, his lawyer announced that Leder had been released due to health issues and relocated to Germany. Following this, Escobar ramped up the terror. He created the radical terrorist group Los Extraditables, whose slogan was, "Better a grave in Colombia than a jail cell in America." This group carried out bombings, assassinated police officers, judges, and high-ranking officials. In 1989, Escobar orchestrated a bombing of a Boeing 727 passenger plane. Over 100 people were on board, most of whom perished. That same year, the cartel attempted to assassinate the head of the secret police, resulting in the deaths of 62 people. In response, the Colombian authorities began a mass campaign to destroy the cartel's labs and coca plantations. Army Special Forces tracked down and killed Escobar's associates, including El Mexicano and Escobar's cousin, Gustavo Gaviria. By the late 1980s, the cartel was losing members and influence. During this time, competitors from the Cali cartel, in collaboration with the CIA, began hunting Escobar. Right-wing paramilitary groups, financed by the Americans, formed Los Peeps, an abbreviation meaning people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. These groups systematically destroyed Escobar's empire, burning his homes and killing anyone associated with the cartel. With the government leaving him no choice, Escobar offered to surrender on the condition that he wouldn't be extradited to the U.S. Under public pressure and the threat of more terrorist attacks, the government agreed. Escobar was imprisoned in a facility he had built for himself, La Catedral. This prison was more like a luxury resort, complete with a jacuzzi, soccer field, and bars. Escobar personally selected the guards and controlled the conditions of his imprisonment. However, this arrangement was temporary. The government soon discovered that Escobar continued conducting his criminal operations from inside the prison. On July 22, 1992, government forces arrived to transfer him to a real prison, but Escobar managed to escape. After his escape, the Colombian government and the CIA launched a massive manhunt. Authorities destroyed the cartel's labs and plantations, disrupted logistics, and arrested his people. At the same time, competitors from the Cali cartel, along with the CIA and right-wing paramilitary groups from Los Peeps, continued hunting Escobar. These groups were relentless, burning his homes and killing anyone even remotely connected to his empire. The Medellin cartel structure was rapidly falling apart. Escobar attempted to send his family abroad to ensure their safety and reduce pressure from the authorities. His wife and children tried to fly to Germany on a private plane, but at the request of the U.S. government, the flight was turned around and the family was returned to Colombia. They were placed in a hotel under the protection of federal agents, and Escobar was forced to remain on the run. He constantly moved to avoid capture and only made brief phone calls to prevent being tracked. On December 2, 1993, Escobar finally decided to call his family. By that time, he hadn't seen them for over a year. He spoke to his son for about 5 minutes, which was long enough for special forces to trace his location. The house from which Escobar made the call was surrounded by SWAT teams. A shootout erupted. Pablo tried to escape across the roof, but was shot by a sniper. There are two versions of his death. One suggests the sniper approached and finished him off with a shot to the head, while the other claims Escobar shot himself to avoid capture. Escobar's death did not end the drug trade in Colombia, but changed its structure. The Medellin cartel ceased to exist, and the Cali cartel took its place, operating more discreetly by using bribes and diplomacy rather than overt terror. Escobar's rise and fall demonstrated that the fame that made him a legend also led to his downfall. Today, Medellin is one of Colombia's top tourist destinations. Souvenirs with Escobar's portrait are sold on the streets, and tourists are offered tours of the places where his glory days unfolded. La Catedral was abandoned until 2007 when Benedictine monks took over, converting it into a memorial for the victims of the Medellin cartel and a nursing home. Escobar's estate, Hacienda Napoles, was taken over by the government and turned into a tourist attraction. As for the hippos from his private zoo, they reproduced and became a problem for the local ecosystem. Colombia's climate proved perfect for their breeding, and they had no natural predators in the country. This led to a significant increase in their population, prompting measures to control them. Escobar's story leaves many questions, especially concerning his finances and how he managed his assets. He used a complex web of offshore companies and banks to hide his income and launder money. One of the main banks through which he conducted operations appeared in CIA documents under the codename Bank of Crooks and Criminals. This bank served not only Escobar but also other dictators and criminals worldwide. Investigating his financial networks became a crucial part of the fight against drug trafficking. By tracking large money transfers and offshore accounts, authorities were able to understand how the Medellin cartel's financial system worked. With this information, law enforcement began arresting those who helped Escobar hide and launder his funds. After Escobar's death, his legacy remains controversial. On one hand, many view him as a legend, a man who fought the system and helped the poor by building schools and hospitals. On the other hand, he was a ruthless killer who used fear and violence to maintain his power. Modern Colombia continues to grapple with the consequences of his reign. Medellin remains a symbol of Escobar's era, but now it attracts tourists rather than drug traffickers. The government and local residents are working to change the city's image by developing new tourist routes and cultural projects to show another side of the story. Yet, despite all these efforts, Escobar's shadow still looms over the city. His image is used in pop culture and tourism, sparking debates among locals. Many believe that the past should remain in the past and shouldn't be turned into a brand. Nevertheless, those personally affected by the terror of the Medellin cartel continue to fight for justice. Memorials for the cartel's victims have become places where people can remember their loved ones and reflect on Escobar's legacy in a new light. When it comes to Escobar's influence on the international drug trade, his methods have become a model for other cartels. After his death, the silver or lead approach was adopted and refined by other criminal organizations in Latin America and beyond. U.S. intelligence agencies continued their war on drug cartels, but after the Medellin cartel was dismantled, many of these cartels simply changed names and carried on. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.